as we start the new year and kick off 2025. So thank you very much for being here. Before we talk about India, I'm going to kick off from where the last panel left things off, because there is a fair degree of trepidation, nervousness about the uncertainty that we're likely to go through come the 20th of January. So let's start with that.
What happens on the 20th of January?
What happens on the 20th of January?
I'm here. I don't know what you're talking about.
No, but, realistically speaking, from a climate perspective as well as an energy markets perspective, what could a Trump administration mean? What implications, what impact is it likely to have in light of what we saw happen in the first administration as well as the rhetoric that we've seen on the campaign trail?
Yeah. Well, Shereen, it's an honor to be with you. I'm such a big fan of yours and really appreciate the work you do. I do want to say, before I answer that specific question, I think if you really look at what happened in the American election, I think something like 7 out of the last 8 elections in the United States have been change elections. I think most American households, if you take out those at the very bottom and certainly those at the very top, have felt negative about their economic prospects over time. When my parents immigrated to the United States in 1970, it was statistically true that 95% of kids born in the United States would do better economically than their parents. Ironically, unless your name was Rockefeller, in which case it's a little bit hard to do better than your dad. Today, that's probably closer to 40%. A while back, we dropped under the 50% threshold. And I think the message of this last election is that people need to believe their government will deliver real results for their economic livelihoods and for their children's future. And neither American political party has actually delivered that over the course of quite a long time. I say that because the Biden administration has made historic investments in greening the American economy. About $1.6 trillion in the 2 big bills, one's called the Inflation Reduction Act, the other is the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill, are fundamentally about green energy investing. But if households don't feel like those dollars are creating more opportunity for their kids, they're not going to support a climate transition program, period. I think that's true anywhere in the world, and I think that's true for every energy transition we work on across this planet. So with that said, which is why it's so important that this alliance is about people and planet, and that we listen to the mothers we listened to yesterday say, I'm all for this solar project, but only if it creates opportunities for me and my kids. Okay, so that's the first thing I want to say. The second is the more direct answer to your question. I mean, I think it's going to be bad. We're going to pull out of the Paris Agreement. To put it mildly, we're going to pull out of the Paris Agreement. I don't think any new administration will unwind too much of the existing past legislation in the IRA and the infrastructure bill. But there's an American Farm Bill that's still outstanding where a lot of incentives for sustainability in agriculture can be unwound. And I think in general, American leadership is unlikely to be a prominent source of climate leadership in the near future. And I think that's probably an understatement.
Yeah, so let me ask you the question then. If we are going to see this vacuum as far as American leadership is concerned, what will that result in specifically as far as financing needs are concerned, and the green gap that we foresee is only going to get wider? What happens there?
Well, you have to understand, so in the U.S. we're making the investments right now to green our economy, and we're ahead of schedule relative to where we were a few years ago. Europe is in the same category. They're making significant green investments in the trillions of dollars. And China, of course, is not just making those investments for the domestic economy, but has effectively captured a large part of the world's supply chain for critical minerals and for products like energy storage that are mission critical to this task globally. So where will leadership come from? I think leadership has to come from India. It has to come from Brazil. It has to come from South Africa. That's where the action is. I mean, we know that if the 70-some countries that are not considered the most developed economies in the world don't change their trajectory, if the business as usual scenarios go forward, in about 20 years, 75% of total global carbon emissions come from just those economies. So to some extent, the world depends on those few places getting the energy transition right. And those places can only get the energy transition right if it serves everybody and creates meaningful human opportunity.
Well, let's talk about India then, because you said that in a couple of weeks from now, you're going to have 30 heads of state meet to take stock of where things stand as far as the energy transition map is concerned, and a lot will be in focus on what's happened here in India and how India could potentially lead the way. What gives you the confidence, what gives you the optimism of what is working in India, what India is doing right, and what could perhaps be an exportable template?
Well, I think the first thing that's working is India has had a strong policy of leadership on this domestically. So 500 gigawatts is a very clear and significant goal. And whether or not India is going to meet the 500 gigawatts on the current trajectory is open to debate, but it's an achievable goal if people come together and are very serious about meeting it. I'd say second, now that solar in India and other sources of renewables are, at 2-3 cents a kilowatt hour, or 2-3 rupees a kilowatt hour, you're at a price point where you're better than the next best fossil fuel alternative. And the challenge is less about will renewables compete financially with fossil fuels, and more about can we upgrade grids to operate them in a way where we can use renewables at a high share of total energy and still meet all the industrial and baseload requirements, which is going to be fundamentally about energy storage and the technology of the grid system itself. So, I'm hugely optimistic. I think the thing I'm personally most optimistic about is what I saw yesterday, which is, you give a farmer a chance to become an energy entrepreneur, double their incomes, and transform their local communities. All of a sudden, their kids, as we saw yesterday, are switching from public schools to private schools. Their dreams and aspirations are changing from staying in their community to going to the urban areas and leading more expansive lives economically. That's what success is going to look like. And I don't think any place on earth has gotten this right yet. But I think India has a legitimate chance to say, as we make this energy transition, it's not just about the total number of gigawatts. It's actually about the number of lives changed.
Now, that's important that you highlight that, but let's talk about this achievable target of 500 gigawatts as well. We're a little over 200 gigawatts cumulatively today. We added about 30 gigawatts in 2024, and the expectation is that that's the kind of run rate that we're going to be doing. What will it take to expedite the current trajectory to be able to get to the 500 gigawatt number?
Yeah. I think a few things. One is obviously more of the mega projects and more of the pathway to scale on that. I've heard it both ways. I've heard people say, especially from my own team, that exactly what you just said, and we're going to be maybe 200 gigawatts short. I've heard others in industry say, oh, it'll go from 30 to 40 to 50 a year, and we might be a year behind, but we'll get to the target. I don't know what the answer is. I do know that you have to have much more investment in this space. You don't get there until you really make sure the grids can take on more renewables and a much higher share of renewables. I think that's going to come down to energy storage, to this digitized grid management information system approach, and ultimately, and this is probably not in the same time horizon, but the adoption of new technologies like nuclear fusion and things like that when they become available.
I'll talk to you about nuclear fusion in just a second, but let's talk about Duet and the digital twins, because I'm going to get the nerd out from you. What will the impacts be, and what are we talking about? I mean, is this the next 2, 3, 5 years? What are we talking about? Well, and what is it going to cost?
So honestly, relative to the cost of this whole transition, it costs basically nothing. And I can detail that in a moment. The idea is very simple. It's that you can't set these targets and say you're going to achieve them without a really hyper-detailed and real-time plan for how you do that. And the only way you can do that is if you have a genuine, genuine energy transition plan grounded in the reality of your current energy system. And there's no place in India where that energy system is modeled, existing in a digital platform, and therefore susceptible to the application of tools like artificial intelligence that can help optimize how you reduce losses, optimize new sources of renewable, tell you exactly where to put what kinds of battery energy storage, and and over time predict how you would serve even new load requirements as the economy grows. And this thing started, in my view, I'm probably a little bit not seeing the whole picture, but there have been other places, single utilities in the United States, Chile. There have been other places that have invested in fully and China, of course,
right,
is the world's leader at this through State Grid, in building a totally digitized platform for their utility management. And China has one utility, so it can do that more efficiently than in America. We have 7,000 to 8,000 utilities. But if you can do that, you can then optimize planning to achieve your goals. And just yesterday in Rajasthan, we saw you can tell me which part of the state we were talking about, but you could see where they put a small 1 megawatt or 2 megawatt solar plant on someone's farm. You could actually track where there was coal power coming to a community and where there was renewable power coming to a community, and you could visually see the transition happening. And that's not even capturing the fact that the coal power is coming at the middle of the night and the renewable power is available all day long. So you need these types of tools to be successful. I think India could be, for the Brazil COP and for other global leadership purposes, could be the role model for building this kind of a system. My back-of-the-envelope estimate is $200 to $300 million. You could probably build this thing for the whole country, and India could be the first emerging economy to have every transformer, every pole, every wire, every generation site totally mapped in a digital twin of its energy system, which would allow the kind of planning and optimization and management that is what I think the world will need in order to meet any reasonable NDC goal.
Well, you're starting this off with the government of Rajasthan. The aspiration is to take this to 10 states, and that's what you're hoping to do at this point in time. But what will the pitch be? Because you're going to have to sell this idea to various state governments and, of course, to the central government as well. What will the pitch be?
For building this kind of a digital system? Well, we just did some meetings today. It doesn't take much of a pitch. I mean, anyone who's had to manage an energy system sees right away. Imagine driving without looking out the window or the windshield. That's what we do today, because if you run a utility and you don't have a system like this, especially if it's for rural communities, you're not actually seeing where your loads are, what your losses are, how you don't know where to optimize loss reduction. You don't know which poles to go upgrade. You don't know where you should put the next transformer. You're not making those decisions in an optimized, data-driven, super efficient way. And this would allow you to do that. The hard part, of course, is all these things are when you have to build baseline infrastructure that's effectively a public good. Getting the money for it's hard, right? So the Rockefeller Foundation, GAP, is committed to funding the first model of this in Rajasthan. But over time, whether it's philanthropy or the public sector, someone should come along and produce a few $100 million and do this for India.
So is that essentially going to be what this partnership, this PPP model that you spoke of, which involves the public sector and, of course, philanthropies as well as the private sector, is capital essentially going to have to be the ask as far as this model is concerned?
Yeah, I think so. I think in general, our goal is to find those catalytic interventions like a digital twin model of the entire Indian energy system, or like distributed renewable electrification provided in small increments but in rural areas tied very closely to small enterprise and farming. Finding those interventions that are the innovations. I think philanthropy can take some of the risk in testing, is this a good idea, or doing the first one in a small way. We started that whole distributed renewable project in Bihar 11 years ago, and we're, it's 30 kilowatts, 60 kilowatts, 150 kilowatts. Now we're at a few megawatts and doing it at scale in some places. So we can take the early risk and be the risk capital there. But ultimately, public sector financing and private commercial capital are going to be needed to take all of these things to scale.
So how big a check are you willing to write at this point in time, given the appetite for risk that you have?
I'll write as much as I can raise, and I think, if you look around the world, think about where we were 3 years ago. 3 years ago, everybody said, well, the OECD countries have topped out their aggregate energy demand, and all they have to do is change their energy mix. And, emerging economies will grow at 4 to 5% a year, energy demand, and so they have to kind of slowly but surely change their energy mix. Just 3 years later, that was the Glasgow story. Just 3 years later, all of that is totally wrong. The United States is blowing through energy demand estimates just because of data centers, which now I think already account for 9% of total utilization. You see the same in Europe. You'll see the same in China. AI as a singular technology will change the world's hunger for energy and do that in a pretty fundamental and comprehensive manner over time. So, if in my job, I feel like I should go to Microsoft and go to Amazon and say, okay, you guys are going to blow up the world with your investment in data centers and GPUs and processing capacity. We need some sort of a mechanism to draw capital from those that have it to places where we need to invest it to have a viable energy system that doesn't destroy this planet.
So are you going to be talking to Microsoft and Amazon?
We try all the time, yes. I do regularly.
Are they open to a conversation?
They are. They're very open to the conversation. Whether the conversation ultimately requires a carbon credit structure that allows them to also get credit for the good things they do, or is purely philanthropic, that's where we're at in terms of our conversation. I personally think the carbon credits can be a mechanism to do that, because every time you put a new data center up somewhere, they have a willingness to buy credits to offset the burden that that's creating, and the capital from that kind of raise should go into the high catalytic public goods investments that I'm describing with the digital twin system and some of the other solutions.
Let me get your take on what's happening as far as electric mobility is concerned. And what we are seeing is a dialing down, at least as far as global corporations are concerned, cutting back on spends at this point in time. And as subsidies wind down, there is a fear that we are going to see a setback on the electrification of mobility as well. What's your take?
It's hard to have a take because I have no idea what's going to happen with tariffs and availability. But it's pretty clear where the technology goes. The technology goes cheaper and cheaper with higher function and more performance, and so it's a little bit hard to imagine that we're not going to be able to benefit from that technology at real scale over the long term. I think India has less than 2% electric vehicle sales in its annualized market. It hopefully it can be much, much higher. I know the GAP team is working on certain segments of the market, like e-buses, that could both be a source of electricity demand for more renewable electricity and be a model for how to make that transition at scale. We work with African countries as well that are interested in transitioning to more electrified transport. And in the U.S., who knows? I just bought an electric truck, and it's like the coolest thing I've ever had. And the functionality is incredibly high. So we'll see. But right now, obviously, that market is quite depressed, and people are skeptical about that transition. So I unfortunately can't share more. I will say this. The EV market is what drives the battery energy storage system and supply chain. And, India should make, and every country should be making, big investments in energy storage, because separate and apart from transport, stationary storage requirements are, I think, largely underestimated and undervalued as part of this transition everywhere in the world. And so when you talk to leaders of big companies, they say, well, we don't understand that there's a lot of different technology. Nobody knows what the winning technology is, so they're not able to invest in scaling supply, and then critical minerals becomes an issue, and Chinese dominance of the supply chain currently becomes an issue. But that's a huge area of opportunity, and hopefully GAP can do more in that space.
I was going to ask you that. Is that going to be a big focus area for you here in India? I mean, the Delhi kind of example that you just gave us, are we going to see much more of that?
Not only that, I mean, Delhi is, I think, a unique example of that within a utility, which is where we want to focus our efforts on BESS. Under Ashwin Dayal's leadership, the Global Leadership Council of GAP, which I chair with Jonas Støre, the Prime Minister of Norway, has pulled together 16 countries to come together and jointly procure energy storage solutions because it lowers the price considerably and it gets you larger volumes.
How much lower are we actually expected to see prices move? Because, you know, as you said, it boils down to affordability, and we have seen prices come off quite sharply. But, you know, what's the kind of trajectory that we're looking at?
Well, in the BEST consortium, you know, the countries, a lot of African countries, some Southeast Asian countries, when they're trying to acquire for a single project a battery energy storage solution, we were finding that the prices were 200 to 400% higher, depending on where in that community, than they would be if you aggregate demand and procure and get the best price available. So I think that's an area where you can see significant price improvement. On the very small mini grids that we built out, and I think Tata Power is building out a few hundred right now, by our math, the key to making those things, to getting the price down even farther in terms of the service price of power to low-income communities, was in fact getting lithium-ion battery storage into those systems and doing it at a low price point. So, yeah, I mean, cheap energy storage that's abundant is a huge part of this transition. And like everything else, if we only make it for Teslas and you know, Hyundais and whomever else, we'll be missing the real human impact, which is going to be stationary storage in these mini grids in Rajasthan and elsewhere.
What is it that you would like to leave the audience here to take forward as your message for what India needs to do from a regulatory perspective, as well as what the ask and the expectation is of the private sector to shoulder some of the responsibility?
Work with us on the distributed renewables, on the BESS, and on things like the digital twin. I think the second is, I think there needs to be more investment from the public sector on the core catalytic initiatives like this digital twinning project. I mean, I really do think for a few $100 million you could build something for India that would be transformational here and transformational for the rest of the world at a time when the world is desperate for big solutions. And so I hope you all can work with those you influence to make that happen at real scale. And then the final thing is, to me, the most important, is I go back to my first answer or non-answer to your first question, which is if we don't demonstrate that the energy transition helps improve the lives of the women and the kids we met yesterday at that solar plant in rural Rajasthan, the whole transition will fail. And we see that failure in our politics in the U.S. We need to react. We see that failure, I think, in populist politics in many other countries around the world. And I think it's too easy for us to just talk about gigawatts and energy and flow and the lineman app and stuff that we think and I think is super cool, and forget that at the end of the day, this is about, does that girl in that household have a brighter future or not?
So I'm going to end by asking you that women-led enterprises, is that going to be a big focus area?
That's the next big focus. I don't think we're getting it right yet. I know the intention is there, but even yesterday, everyone we met who was benefiting was male. And unless women get income, unless girls get education, you don't get that positive flywheel of development and growth happening in a meaningful way. So we have to double down on that and get it right. Thankfully, partners like the Gates Foundation and others are already supporting GF to explore that. But that should be a much, much bigger focus of our community's work.
Is there a target that you've set for yourself?
No, but there should be. Ashwin, let's come up with a target, and there should be.
Okay, we look forward to hearing back from you on the target that you decide to set for yourself. But thank you very, very much for joining us here this evening and for giving us a very comprehensive view of where things currently stand in the world with all the uncertainty that we're dealing with, and more importantly, what the trajectory here in India looks like. Appreciate your time, and we wish you the very best of luck. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.